Kia ora everyone. I think we might begin and kick off. So ki te whānau o te tāpui ata whai, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko piripiri te maunga, ko waitohi te awa, ko toku maru te waka, ki te taha o toku ki te taha o toku mātua o te Aotearoa te waka a Maori toku iwi, ki te taha o toku whaia ko te oropi ona iwi. Ko Manutaki o te tāpui ata whai, ko Helen Robinson taku ingoa. Kia ora, my name is Helen Robinson and it's my very genuine pleasure to be here with you today. I am the Auckland City Missioner and we're gathering for about half an hour this morning to honour and acknowledge World Food Day, an incredibly important day in our country and in fact throughout the world. So thank you for joining me here today. It's lovely to be with you. We're going to start with a karakia together that I think Deb is going to place up and then we'll really kick off. So Deb, are you there? So if you would like to do this karakia with me, then please feel free. I'll just check, Deb, that you've got that up on the screen so that everybody can see. Lovely. So, inoi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te atākura, hei tio, hei hoka, hei hauhunga, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. As I've just had an opportunity just to introduce myself, I'd really like to encourage you to, in the chat function, just introduce who you are, say a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what brings you to joining us today. It really is my pleasure to be with you here. Some of you may know a lot about World Food Day and some of you may know a little. It was actually started by the United Nations Food Agricultural Organization. Always find that hard to say. So sometimes it's a UN FAO. And it was actually started on October the 16th in honour of the beginning of the FAO. So that's why they chose that day. And was started in 1979 as a way to really encourage reflection, thought, discussion, awareness about the presence of food insecurity across our world. And I think the challenge for all of us really is that in whatever part of the world that we're viewing this picture from, that we're reflecting on what does food mean for us here in Aotearoa, what is particularly the reality of food insecurity, so people who don't have enough money for food. It really is quite a special day that enables us to join hands really across our international community and then across our country. So one of the most common questions that I get asked is, what is food insecurity? And if you were to Google food insecurity, you'd actually see that there are all kinds of academic definitions, all that have great validity. And very, very simply, what it means is that people have enough good food. So when I use the word good, what I'm genuinely referring to there is that it's nutritionally adequate and that it's culturally appropriate. And that implicit in that is that people can access that food without any sense of shame. So that actually people might have, might meet their nutritional needs through accessing a food parcel here at the mission. But if they feel a deep sense of shame about that, then actually they by definition are food insecure. And access, of course, does include the literal ability to get that food, so that there are parts of our world, and in fact even parts of our country, where the geographical access to food is particularly difficult, and those areas are known as food deserts. We don't have a lot of them in New Zealand, but they are certainly available. So when you go back, if I just step back again a little bit, what is food insecurity, or what is food security? Food security is just having enough good food, enough for you and enough for your whānau that you can access without stress, without shame, and that you particularly have the resources to access that food. And I think that really takes me to the key driver, certainly throughout the world and here in New Zealand, of food insecurity. So food insecurity is driven very, very simply by inadequate income. I'm conscious that when I talk to lots of people, everybody often has their own kind of idea that food insecurity is perhaps caused by people not knowing how to cook food, or not having the basic food literacy skills, or perhaps not being able to budget. And while I understand the sense of those questions or those thoughts in people, what the evidence tells us, both talking to the thousands of individuals, certainly that the mission has been part of, and in the much bigger academic evidence that has been done, is that none of that is actually the case. That what we are talking about here is there's just not enough money to buy the food that people need. Now, this is quite extraordinary in a country that produces enough food to feed 40 million of us, which is a really, really big figure that you start to get your head around. So we can feed our New Zealand population 8 times over, and yet we believe somewhere between 15 to 20% of New Zealand today does not have access to enough good food. Now, I'll take you back over those stats, because another really good question that I get asked often is actually how many people are food insecure in New Zealand? And this is actually, unfortunately, a very difficult question to answer. We have measured the presence of food insecurity in our adult population once in our history. So in 2008, 2009, in the adult nutritional survey that was done by the Ministry of Health, they measured the presence of food insecurity in the adult population. And it showed then in 2008, 2009, that 7% of New Zealand was severely or in a high level of food insecurity. Now, unfortunately, it has never been measured in the adult population since. So one of the calls to action that the mission has been asking for some time, that we invite you to partake in, if you should be so willing, is to really, really encourage, challenge, push that there is an adult measurement regularly in New Zealand of the presence of food insecurity, simply because it's very, very hard to acknowledge something that we don't measure. And it's very, very hard to know if what we are doing is helping if we're not actually getting some kind of regular measurement. So in a simple level, what the mission is asking for is that every 2 years, the adult population is measured, and then every 2 years, the child population is measured. So actually we'd have this rotational measurement annually, adults 1 year, children another year. The child population, or the presence of food insecurity in the child population, has been measured since 2008, 2009, and that was data taken again from the Ministry of Health in a survey that they did in 2015 to 16, and that data was actually released in 2019. So even though it was released in 2019, it was taken from a measurement 3 or 4 years earlier. And like shockingly, and again to our nation's shame, what was found in that data is that 19% of New Zealand children in 2015, 2016 were food insecure. So came from families that did not have access to enough good food. And that 19% certainly accords with the experience that we have here at the mission, and generally as we listen to our colleagues throughout New Zealand in terms of the level of demand that we're seeing. So when you look at that 19% in 2015, 2016, you get this kind of very simple analysis that 1 in 5 children are food insecure. Disproportionately affects certain groups in our society, and particularly affects Maori and Pacific children. So as an ethnicity grouping, the one ethnicity that is highest disproportionately are our Pacifica communities, very closely followed by Maori, and then the rest of New Zealand. So I've started a working kind of analysis quite conservatively now in 2021 that 15 to 20% of us today don't have enough money for food, so don't have access to enough good nutrition. And you go back to what I was saying before, that really is driven by a lack of inadequate income. So you start to look at parts of our society or places of our society that don't have enough income. What we know when we talk to people who are coming to ask us for food is that the payment of food or the purchase of food is what we call a discretionary item. So in a weekly set of requirements that a family needs to spend money on to live, that food is down the list. So people will pay their rent or their mortgage. They will pay to send their kids to school. They'll pay to send their kids to the doctor. They will pay the utility bills, so water, electricity, gas, and then they will pay for food. So it really is that last item on the list. So you can see that it's really does become very simple. It's just not enough money coming in against what needs to go out. Knowing this, though, starts to give us some insight into the solution about what this, how we might respond to that. And I will get to that later. I think it's worth noting in your head here, though, that the relationship between food insecurity and the cost of housing. So if we increased our incomes significantly in our community, for there to be money left over for food, we would actually have to stabilise expenses. And the key expenses, certainly that is happening here in Auckland and across our country, is the cost of housing. So even if incomes increase, if housing increases, then it becomes a no-win game, or a kind of a zero-sum game for families who really are suffering. One of the things that has been very top of mind here for the mission has been the impact of COVID-19 on the presence of food insecurity actually throughout our nation. I want to take you back to February of 2019, or February of 2020 actually, February of last year, before we had COVID in our midst. And the mission would be distributing somewhere ourselves with our partners, somewhere between 400 to 500 food parcels a week. So at the mission here, we have 4 key sites of food distribution. Here at our Boston Road service in Central City, Auckland, with our partners at Papakura Marae, at Ngā Whare Marae and Favona, and at Manurewa Marae. And today is a bit of an opportunity for me to shout out to those extraordinary people across all those services actually. So in 2020, we were doing 400-500. In the first series of lockdown, we did a peak across the 4 of us of 1,500 food parcels a week. And that was at the height of level 4. So that was 3 times our normal. And what we started to experience come about July, August last year, is that the numbers had started to slowly decline and reached a new normal of about 1,000 food parcels a week. So that's double what we were doing in February of last year. Now those, when I say 1,000 food parcels, what's helpful to know in your head is that one food parcel, the metric for it, feeds a family of 4 for 3 meals for 4 days, meeting their adequate nutritional requirements. So 1,000 food parcels actually represents 1,000 families that are coming to us, families of 4. Let's say if you have a family of 8, then they would actually get 2 food parcels. So that's why sometimes there's actually a slight variance between the number of assessments we do and the amount of food that's distributed. Anyway, I'll get back to my previous train of thought. In August of this year, before this lockdown, we were doing 1,000 food parcels a week. And since the beginning of this lockdown, we have averaged 2,000 food parcels a week. So that is double what we were doing at the beginning of August of this year and 4 times what we were doing in February of last year. So you can see we had 500 February last year. We reached this new normal when we got out of those first series of lockdowns. And then we went into this lockdown that obviously we're still not out of. And we're at this, I hope, peak of 2,000 food parcels a week. Now, our big concern is how long will this need last for? And then secondly, is there going to be a new normal? So what it shows us is that COVID-19 has a economic impact, a detrimental economic impact on a large group of New Zealand society. That means that people who weren't needing support before COVID are now. So that you start to get a sense that uh, the economic fallout of COVID is significant and is sustained, and is particularly experienced by groups in society where they are on low income or very vulnerable employment. So I'm thinking particularly of people who are on casual labour or contract labour, or even people who are entitled to the wage subsidy, which really is a very good thing. But there is obviously a financial limit to that wage subsidy. And if that limit doesn't meet the needs of that family, and particularly the housing payments, you can see that very, very shortly, people just simply run out of enough money for food. Now, what's concerning for me, or it's very concerning for me on a number of different levels. There's just this very immediate, humane, person-to-person, family-to-family connection that says, it is unbelievable that you don't have enough food this week. And that deep sense of compassion that calls us to respond in the immediate. Beyond the immediate, what we know, and certainly what research we've done here at the mission, and the links to those research will, I think Deb, our comms person, will put in the chat function. What those research tell us is that food insecurity has a short, medium and long-term impact on people's mental well-being. Now, none of this is rocket science, but we have needed the evidence to be able to back that up. So what the research that we did shows is that this creates significant stress in people's lives. And then secondly, it over time decreases people's mental well-being. And again, this is not rocket science. If you're going to go without food in the short term, you are genuinely going to be very stressed about that reality. Then if you're going to go without food in the mid to long term, your well-being will suffer. Secondly, it affects our physical health and well-being. Now, again, that's not rocket science when most of us understand that nutrition is key to sustaining good and well lives, both in the short, medium and long term. Now, if you were wanting some more details about the physical impact of food insecurity, it's really worth getting your hands on that Ministry of Health report looking at the impact of food security on children in New Zealand. They did some extraordinary and sophisticated analysis that started to measure things like the rate of asthma in children goes up for families who are food insecure. So that very, very specifically, they detailed the evidence of the physical impact of what happens when people are food insecure. There is a real challenge in New Zealand at the moment, and I think in fact across the world, that says, okay, we are food insecure. What does that actually mean, and how can we respond? And I think certainly for places like the mission, I feel very, very caught, because the one answer to food insecurity is not producing more food parcels. Yet in their very, very humane, immediate response, that's exactly what we need to do. So I'm conscious in my time here at the mission, and I've been here at the mission for 9 years, is that when I started at the mission, we were distributing 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 food parcels a year, and now we're getting to the vicinity of over 50,000. We will do over 50,000 food parcels this financial year. So it starts to be kind of, if I was very honest with you, dumb. If this problem is getting worse, all we're doing is putting out more food parcels to respond to a worsening problem. Surely there is something that we can do at the systemic and structural level to actually shift this game so that what we would start to see at the mission is a reduction in the need of support for food. Now, I wish there was a simple answer to this, and there are some simple answers, but actually the presence of food insecurity is what's known as a wicked problem. It's complex, it's multi-layered, it feeds in on itself. What it does do is point to the real acerbic end of income and wealth inequality in our country. That there are some people who are suffering disproportionately the effect of food insecurity, and women are bearing this burden on our behalf, particularly women raising children and women raising children alone. The most food insecure individual in our country is a mother raising children alone who is literally going without food on a regular basis so her children can eat. So what that makes me start to say is some much bigger questions that say, what are some policies and procedures and processes, strategies that we can do that can support women and can support women raising children, and particularly those raising children alone. So, for example, I would really like us to focus on the sole parent benefit and actually look at raising the income on the sole parent benefit and some of the other details around that, like the amount of work that we might be able to work in if we were receiving that benefit before it starts getting reduced or taxed from us. Child Poverty Action Group have been talking for many years about looking at the tax credits that are available in working families, and to be able to actually give that to families who are raising children on a benefit as well, so that there is an equaliser in terms of income, whether someone is in paid work or unpaid work. And I think that does lead me to quite a segue that acknowledges that when we start to really dig into some of those deeper issues about food security, is that it really causes us to question the value that we are placing on raising children. At the moment, we don't even recognise it as work. So we need to take a strong gender analysis here, and then we particularly need to acknowledge that it is Māori and Pacific women who are bearing this burden on our behalf. So that we need to then start responding in appropriate ways, both for Māori and for Pacifica, and encourage more and more a Māori for Māori response and a Pacifica for Pacifica response. And looking at how we allocate resources and power across our country so that that might happen. I would like to encourage everyone, either as an employer on this call or as an employee on this call, or simply as a member of our country, to really look at the living wage. If income and adequate income is the key driver of food security, then let's look at where our incomes are compromised and raise that. And one of the key ways that we can do that is the living wage. So I would really encourage you, appropriate, if you are so willing, to your organisations to begin to ask questions. Are you in an organisation that is a living wage organisation? And is there any ways that you can support your organisation or other organisations to become one? We need to look at benefit levels. I really acknowledge the government of this day who has placed the first significant rise for decades in benefit levels, and the fact that it is measured now against our wage levels, so that every year it'll increase proportionate to that. However, the amount of money on a benefit even now is simply not enough. So I would encourage you to be talking to your MPs to actually really raise the level of benefits again, particularly focusing on where children are. So you start to see that there are a number of calls to action. We want measurement in this country. We want income raised, the living wage, benefit levels raised. We want to be brave and courageous as a country and actually acknowledge the impact of sexism and the impact of racism and colonisation as key drivers as the presence of food insecurity in our midst. In that bravery and that willingness to acknowledge the problem and the need for what it is, we might actually be able to begin to respond. And so that what that would mean very genuinely is that over time, the need would stabilise and then the need for food would begin to decrease. I think there's also a very real reality of being conscious of your neighbours and your communities, whether that's through a school, whether that's through your geographical area, whether that's through your workplace, your church community, that if you think 1 in 5 people are food insecure, I have no doubt that there will be someone who you talk to every day that will be suffering this reality or is in a very, very close geographical presence to you. And so my encouragement to that is to fall into or step into what I call a village mentality. If it truly is your neighbour is going without food, then what is it that you can do to be in relationship with them and then to begin to share the resources that you may or may not have? I have to acknowledge that the mission is only able to respond to the reality of this level of need that we see because of the extraordinary support that we do receive. We do receive some funding from government for this, and we have received that during COVID. That funding doesn't meet our needs. We've started to have to begin to create a significant distribution centre because of the level of the numbers. We're very grateful to the Auckland public and philanthropy generally who is supporting us to respond, and I suspect that there may be a number of donors on this call, so I do very genuinely want to thank you for your support. You know, and if people were in a position, organisations like the Mission, but there are many other good organisations across Auckland and across our country that really are at the coal, you know, like the coalface, the edge of being in relationship with people. So that just kind of gives you a very snapshot overview. Unbelievably, I've been talking for 30 minutes and you've been incredibly patient listening. Starts to give you a sense of the history of World Food Day, of what food insecurity is, of the key driver of food insecurity, of measurement in New Zealand and where we're at and where we're not at and what we need to do, what the impact COVID has had, and actually some of the, just a very quick analysis of some of the deep structural drivers of this reality and some very specific things that we might be able to do in response. Now, I did want to open the floor for any questions, either if people would like to unmic themselves and ask the question direct, or if anyone would like to say something in the chat. And I'm sure Deb might let me know too if there are any questions that anyone has. It's kind of been a whistle-stop tour on food insecurity, so please feel free to shout out and ask a question. Great. So Deb has just asked me, what is it that the one thing individuals can do to help? It's a really good question and quite a hard one to answer, to be honest. I think very genuinely it depends on your context and what is going on in your life and what community and connections and organisations and places you're involved in. I think one of the key kind of call to actions and purposes of World Food Day is to raise awareness of the presence of food insecurity. Most people in New Zealand are deeply shocked when I say 1 in 5 of us today doesn't have enough money for food. So educate yourself and educate your families and your communities. And even if it's as simple as looking up that 2019 research that I referred to, I think Deb put the link in the chat function, but even if you just put child food insecurity in New Zealand 2019, you will get a really good sense of the latest Ministry of Health data that has been released. And even now it's 5 or 6 years old, but it is the best of it. Share that with people. And then I think in that process, what actually happens is that our eyes start to be open and you start to wonder who around you is food insecure. And then, like all things, all good stuff starts with relationship, so that we just start talking to people and genuinely listening to their reality and responding. If you're in a position to donate food or money, do so. I mean, certainly the mission would be grateful for either, but as I said before, there are many organisations. I think at a bigger picture level, the mission is really proud to be part of an organisation called Kōrero Kai that's really worth Googling. So Kore, K-O-R-E, Hia Kai, H-I-A-K-A-I. And that is a national food advocacy body that is attempting to do some of this much bigger picture stuff. And one of the things I'm conscious of is that the way that we create change here is by gathering together. When I speak before about what you said, it would be really interesting if your organisation is not in a living wage employer, would be to ask your boss, can you be? What would it take? Perhaps it might be actually talking to your MPs and asking them about increasing benefit levels. Finally, I think writing to those MPs about that measurement and the need for regular measurement is super important. So depending on your context and what's appropriate for you, I think there's lots of good options in there. There's another option here, question here that's just been asked is what goes into a typical food parcel? Now, if you wanted the literal details, you can go online, but I do want to shout out to Kōrero Kai, who I just mentioned before, who has done this wonderful piece of work that says what's in a food parcel. So they did a piece of work that actually said, what are the nutritional requirements that people need to meet to feed a family of 4 for 3 meals for 4 days? And they created genuinely a list that said, this is the amount of protein, this is the amount of fruit and vegetables, this is the amount of dairy, this is the amount of carbohydrates. And that's what's in a food parcel. So the mission has agreed to sign up to what's in a food parcel. So that means every food parcel would have enough meat, which sometimes is mince, or maybe eggs, or maybe sausages. To give you an indication, could be tinned tuna or tinned mackerel, sometimes tinned chicken, just to give you a sense of the kind of protein that would be in there. Then there's carbohydrates, so that there would be bread and rice and pasta, cereals. Then there's dairy, so that there would be margarine or butter and milk being really, really important. Then there's vegetables and fruit, so carrots, onions, potatoes, both canned fruit and fresh fruit appropriate to what we get. And then sometimes things like, there's often tea in there, a spread. You just think, what would your family need for 4 days to do so? So I think that hopefully gives you a little bit of a sense of what's in a food parcel. Just wondering if there are any other questions that I can answer here. What is really exciting that is happening across our country is that organisations are, like the mission, are standing up not only in their response literally to food security and the distribution of food, but into asking those questions, why? I need to acknowledge here the New Zealand Food Network, which is a national distribution network that certainly supports the mission, but many, many food hubs throughout our country are supported by the government to do so, and philanthropy, I understand, in the distribution of food. And also the Aotearoa Food Rescue Alliance, between which brings together food rescue organisations that support the distribution of food too. So these 3 national organisations, Kōrero Kai, the New Zealand Food Network, Aotearoa Food Alliance, you can start to see that New Zealand is gathering steam in terms of its response nationally. So there's lots of good stuff happening. This is often quite a difficult conversation to have, but it's also a very good one. There are signs of hope.
Kia ora, Helen, it's Daniella Rudolph speaking. Sorry, I'm just on my phone, so there's no photo of me or anything. I was just wanting to I'm I work as a social worker at Counties Manukau DHB for people who had strokes, and I'm also doing a postgrad paper at Auckland University, and one of the things I looked at was food insecurities, and just in South Auckland, the huge inadequacies, or obviously you talked about Maori and Pacifica, but also just the amount of rent that is facing people. So that, and I just wondered, will there be an opportunity, I guess, from the government? I know we've got some people who've got lots of money and some people who are really, really struggling. And I think myself, in terms of that, until people have their own house themselves that they can call themselves, instead of paying humongous amounts of rent to somebody, it's such a, I don't know, do you think there's ever going to be hope that this will ever happen? Because
yeah, Danielle, it's a very, very good question. We're just losing you at the end there. It's pretty hard to move from the reality that income inadequacy is the driver of food insecurity. And I think Kōrero Kai is putting out a very special piece of work this week. So do jump onto their website this week, or you might hear really looking at the reality that income inadequacy. I come from a position, certainly as Manutaki or leader of the mission, that says that things don't have to be the way they are. And that every day I actually wake up and make a fundamental decision to that choice. And that it also understands that the presence of food insecurity is only there because we are constructing it so. We are making decisions in our society that's saying this is how things are, therefore some people have and some people don't. And one of the wonderful things about being at the mission is that I do very genuinely get to see the courage and the generosity and the cleverness of New Zealand across all sectors, private government, NGO, council. And today I choose that, yes, there will be a difference. I have to acknowledge that the depth of need is significant. Trish Malcolm, who runs Kōrero Kai, and I have often talked about what particularly is the need in Auckland and South Auckland. And certainly my sense is that it would be a lot higher than that 20%. But in the absence of data, so Daniella, the need that you are seeing is very, very real. And you've described the situation beautifully. Housing and food insecurity really go hand in hand. Thank you for the work you're doing. Is there any other questions? I'm very conscious here in Auckland. Any of you who are in Auckland will know that it is the most incredibly beautiful day out there. There's a sense of summer and spring, and more summer and spring. And we had promised to be online here today for half an hour. So here we are, nearly 40 minutes in. I want to thank you for joining me today. I suspect that because you have turned up, it's because you're interested and aware and know. Thank you for your willingness just to sit and listen and be part of this. And actually just be part of a movement and people, I think, Daniella, to honour your words and your request that says that we want to create another reality. And the key, or the beginning to that, is having the courage to acknowledge that this is a significant need and that it is not the fault of any one individual. Rather, it is structurally driven. And we need to address those structural drivers to get out of this mess. I want to acknowledge everyone, and I've named a few of people who really on the day-to-day across our country respond to food insecurity. I want to do a very big shout out to the mission and our partners. We have a depot, a team at our distribution centre and at our Boston Road. I would say there would be 40 staff on a day-to-day responding, and I particularly want to acknowledge you and on behalf of the mission to thank you very much for the work that you are doing. You make a difference. So go and enjoy that day. I think we're going to end with a karakia together, and Deb, I think you might just put that karakia up. So please say this with me. Thank you for your time and your acknowledgement of World Food Day 2021. Inoi tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu kraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te warua tapu, ake, 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 amine. Go well, ka kite anō.
Thank you, Helen.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.